Hello everyone and welcome back to Floodlights Camera Action from Thorgan Hazard to Thor Ragnarok. We look to bridge the gap between film and football and tell exactly what films you should be watching, what ones to avoid. I'm Jack, as always, I'm joined by Veronika, but this week we have a very special guest. It is the creator, writer, director, lead actor of Mythos Ragnarok. It is Ed Gamester. Ed, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell our audience a bit about your show and why they should go and watch it?
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here. My show's called Mythos Ragnarok, and you should come and see it if only for the reason that it is the only show of its kind on planet Earth. It's the only show in which the art of professional wrestling has been turned on its head and made into a theatrical production. So there are storylines and there are great characters all smashing themselves to pieces, but for a reason, unlike often in wrestling. If you're interested in Norse gods, that is the storyline we follow, and those are the characters that we use. But if you're not into Norse gods, you really don't have to know anything about it at all to enjoy it.
How do you balance the importance of having an engaging story and the storytelling in the show with the kind of exciting spectacle of wrestling as a sport or a performance art?
I think it's actually as weird as people think, because that is essentially just what professional wrestling is. The actual wrestling matches in wrestling are really just a manifestation of challenges and storylines that have been built up over weeks or months, or in sometimes years, which is why people stick with wrestling week in, week out, which is why Raw is the longest weekly episodic TV show in the history of the world, is because those storylines are what make the fights have meaning. Now, that's difficult for you if you're not interested in wrestling, because you can't be bothered to watch all of the build-up, and I understand that. But the spectacle of wrestling itself is equally enjoyable, even if you're not interested in the faux sport element. So all I did was take the concept of resolving conflict through fighting, which is what wrestling is, and put it into a different world, one which is very familiar with violence and conflict, which is Norse mythology. But really, that's a lot of stories we have these days. Most action movies resolve their conflicts through fight scenes. We just happen to do it live on stage, which I think is much cooler.
What would you say is the most kind of physically or maybe even mentally demanding part of the show? And what does your kind of pre and post show routine look like? How do you recover? Do you do ice baths? Do you do yoga? Do you read a book? What does that kind of process look like?
Yeah, you're asking the wrong person there, Jack. So I'm the lead actor of Mythos Ragnarok. My workload is emotionally and physically probably the heaviest of the cast, but I'm also the producer and the director of the show. So that means the second I get off stage, I'm then taking the show down. The second I arrive in the theater, I'm putting the show up. There is no downtime. There is no recovery. For me, at this stage of my career, at least, it is just a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job in which I'm clinging on for dear life. But on the upside of that, I think that carries through to the physical performance. The performances I give on a daily basis is the 2 hours of the day when I'm not swamped with admin. It's the 2 hours of the day when I can really concentrate on my craft as an actor. And I think that the urgency, the emotion that goes into every performance is heightened by that. And I'm certain the audience can feel that, because I speak to people after the show and they tell me that they can feel the passion behind all of our performances. So there isn't an answer, Jack. I just cling on and give it my all.
Hope for the best.
Yeah.
You're going to be touring Europe with the show as well as the UK, and I wanted to ask if you could add an extra date in any place in the world, where would you go and do the show?
Wow, anywhere in the world? Good Lord. If you'd have asked me this a few months ago, I'd have said Amsterdam. But we got there, and we did Delamar in a couple of months ago, which was amazing. So I'm going to have to change my answer now. In Europe, I would love to play in Prague. We're doing 3 days in the Czech Republic next year, but none of them are in Prague. We're doing, I think, 6 different European countries next year, actually. Germany, Poland, Austria, Czech Republic, Switzerland, and then we're back in the Netherlands for an entire month. So we're really making our way around the whole of Europe. So if I had to add one other place in, I mean, we've been to Canada, we've been to Australia. You know what? I'm desperate to go to Istanbul. We nearly went there this year, but it is not easy trying to produce shows in Turkey. It's a whole different culture. And like I say, because I produced the show myself, there's a lot that I'm having to learn. So I think Istanbul, because it's this wonderful meeting of Eastern and Western cultures where there's a significant amount of Viking history there as well, which kind of plays into the themes of our shows and the motivations for making the show. So if I had to pick one place in the world, I think I would say Istanbul.
You mentioned there about kind of learning the behind the scenes production side of things. What were kind of some unexpected challenges or learning blocks you've had to kind of put in place to kind of make the show flow as well as it does?
Yeah, when it comes to actually putting the show together, the show itself came together really smoothly because everyone I use, everyone in the cast is a professional wrestler. These aren't hobbyists. These are people that do this for a living. So they know what is required of them and they go out there and they do it. There were no rehearsals. There was barely a script to start with. I just had an idea and I threw it together and gave it to them. And that's why the show, in my opinion, worked so well because I hire the best people and I trust them to do what they do best. I don't try and micromanage performers into performing how I want them to because just because I want it to be that way doesn't mean that that's how it would be best or connect to the audience best. So the show itself ran fairly smoothly right from the beginning. The challenge came in trying to actually produce and promote the show into venues because people still see what I do as being a pretend sport and not a real art form. Because people don't understand professional wrestling, because they only see professional wrestling from an outsider's point of view, they still think that what we're doing is trying to pretend that we're having a real fight, which is really not the art at all. What we have is a storytelling platform that uses physical performances and normally fight scenes, right? But people don't understand that, so they still don't want to hire their venue out or program a show that is pretending to be violent. So trying to get the show into theaters was by far the hardest thing, Jack. And it still is. Like we've been in some of the greatest theaters on the planet, and still there are local venues around the UK that turn their noses up at us because they still think that we're just like a wrestling show with people pretending to fight. So that remains the most difficult thing.
I'm very much an outsider to wrestling. I've kind of when I was a kid, I'd maybe watch it or I'd play video games, for example. So I'm not going to profess to be the biggest fan. Really good promotion for your show. But how has that stigma kind of changed? Because, as you say, a theatre won't hesitate to put on a show about people pretending to be murderers or whatever. But there is this kind of weird stigma. It's like, oh, they're only play fighting. It's like, well, no, it's storytelling. But how much has that changed in kind of your career?
It is starting to change. I can say that with confidence because I was the first person to do this in this way in theatre. And when I started, I was just shut down everywhere that I went, which is why our show started at Edinburgh Fringe, because they really gave me some free rein to be creative. And then when people came to see it by the thousand, they slowly worked out that this is a lot more than they thought that it was. And so doors have started opening, theatres have started taking our show in. And as a result, commercial producers with money have started making wrestling themed shows because they've started to see that there is more to it. And I don't think it's absurd to say that is largely because of our show. We've been around for 4 years now. We perform for something like 50, 60,000 people. It's not huge by commercial standards, but it's certainly making waves. So it's changing. People are welcoming me in. It's certainly not with, open arms all the time. A lot of the time, I think they program the show because the numbers speak for itself and then people's response to the show speaks for itself. But they still, they still categorize it in dance or physical theater in their own show categories. They still put like an age restriction of like 3+ or 5+ on it because they think it's going to be for children. They still don't put the effort into actually trying to understand what the production is, which I think makes us fairly rare as a show because I think a lot of the time producers and directors maybe get a bit more respect. But it's definitely going the right way. Whether I'm still alive by the time it's really considered a performance art, Jack, I don't know.
In my research, I saw that you've been a stunt performer in some films before, and I wanted to ask you, they've been getting some recognition with the Oscar category coming soon, and is there anything that people don't realize about the work that stunt performers actually do on film?
Yeah, no, you're right. My background was as a stunt performer. That's actually why I came up with the idea of doing this show, because in the same way that I realized people didn't really understand what I did as a wrestler, as an audience member, I also realized that other stunt performers didn't understand what I did as a wrestler. And they didn't understand that what I did on stage or in a ring was the same thing that they were doing on a camera, just for marginal money and with no second takes, no pads, and no... I realized that the skill I had to be able to do this live was every bit as impressive as the skill that I was required to do on camera, in some ways more so. So I decided that I wanted to show them what I could do. I wanted to show audiences what wrestlers could do. So being a stuntman was very much part of the foundation of the show. But it's the same. It's the same stigma for stunt performers. People don't realize how much of what they see on the screen is a stunt performer and not an actor. I once heard a good example that if you can't see the actor's face, the chances are it's a stunt performer. Not just because it's safer, but because we're cheaper. So you don't need to hire a A-list actor if all you can see is their legs or their feet or them running across a bridge. Whereas you can throw a stunt performer in there all day long. I I know people understand that stunts are risky. And I think that they kind of glamorize it for that reason, but it's not the risks that make stunts into a difficult career. It's the sheer workload, what's expected of you on a daily basis, even when you're not on camera. They are some of the hardest working people that I've ever come across, and I've worked in quite a lot of industries by this point. So I think that would be, if I could dispel a myth, or rather, if I could enlighten a little bit about what stunt performers do, it is to say that when the camera isn't rolling, their work doesn't stop. The creation of those fight scenes, the integration of stories into the physical performance, the maintenance of equipment, the moving around of stuff. There's a lot of stuff on films. Core stunts goes a lot deeper than just being, hit by a car.
Now, if you could have a drink, or I don't know if you drink, a meal out, for example, with any Norse god, who would you choose and why? Or maybe you can choose a selection if you want a little entourage with you.
Yeah, selection. Oh, well. I mean, the obvious answer is Odin, because he is a god of wisdom, his knowledge of the runes, his knowledge of poetry. His role within mythology is largely as a great guy to have a feast, very specifically. The whole of the Havamal is sayings of Odin that, he would advise people when it comes to feasting and reveling. So he's the obvious choice. But I also don't think he's very much fun. And I don't know that he'd respect me enough to give me any answers. I think he'd quiz me about my wisdom and I'd come up short. So I think I'd start writing an invitation to Odin, and then I'd change my mind and I'd redirect it to Loki because he seems like he'd be great fun to have around at a feast.
Bit of mischief, he's a bit cheeky.
Exactly. He's a gossip monger as well. So I think I'd cross out Odin's name and start writing Loki's name, but then I'd probably hesitate because when you actually look at what Loki achieves in the mythology, specifically at feasts, he's a troublemaker. He's only going to accuse me of sleeping with other people's wives and accuse me of shape-shifting and theft and all kinds of other things. So I'd probably end up crossing his name out as well. There's no way I'd feast with Thor. That's just asking for trouble, isn't it?
A Feast with Thor does sound like a great Sunday morning ITV2 cooking show.
Oh,
Get everyone around the table, a little feast with Thor.
it does. And then entire oxens and salmon just laid out, and then you just hear what he says. It also sounds like the last of the Game of Thrones books, doesn't it? Like when
Yeah.
J.R.R.
That's the one that
just
George
watches
R. R. Martin
that.
hasn't written yet. It's Winter, Feast with Thor.
Yeah, the little known epilogue. So in the end, I think it would come down to Freya, because I think what people know about Freya this day and age is probably a fraction of what people would have known about Freya back in the day. Her role as a goddess of love, but also of battle, I think makes her one of the best contenders for a conversationalist. Somebody who obviously deals with the extremes of human nature and has seen some stuff, So I think it'd be her. She'd be a riot.
Just out of curiosity, where does your interest and passion in Norse mythology come from? Is it something that you studied, or was it a hobby of yours?
Both. It was both. I came across the myths when I was a teenager, like a lot of people. I studied them. I read them for fun. I got interested in runes and the cultural elements surrounding it. I then took a course in ancient Icelandic when I was studying philosophy at the University of Leeds. And what that involved was learning enough of the language to read the mythology, the poetry, in its original languages and translate them directly to try and get more of an understanding of what's actually going on in the poetry. Because there's a lot of linguistic games and things they play in their poetry, just like we do, that you can't really get a proper understanding of if you're trying to read translations of it. So I studied them as well. So I was passionate about them. I loved them, and then I studied them as well. And I think the thing that draws me to them, drew me to them originally, and has continued to, is that they're actually an awful lot like pro wrestling. The storylines, the characters, the conflicts. If you swap Norse gods out for WWE wrestlers, I'm pretty sure you would find complete parallels in modern storytelling. Because these are basic human emotions and experiences at the end of the day. A lot of other mythologies can be quite lofty and aimed at principles here, there, and everywhere, but a lot of the Norse mythology is about scrapping in the mud over power and honor and other such things. Things that people don't think of as being particularly, worthy, but is actually stuff that we deal with on a daily basis as humans. So, yeah, I think we owe a lot to those myths, not just culturally, but artistically. A lot of modern and older fantasy writers would draw on these storylines. People give a lot of credit to Shakespeare and his storylines in terms of the theatre, but when it comes to literature, there's a lot that we owe to Old Norse poetry.
Now, I'm not sure if you've watched a couple of these films, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on wrestling films, such as kind of The Wrestler and The Iron Claw, in terms of how well they've been able to adapt the sport of wrestling or the art of wrestling, not sure what you want to call it, into the big screen.
Yeah.
Or if you're not that bothered at all by them, which is an equally valid response.
Yeah, I tend to avoid things that are wrestling themed because most of the time they're not made by anyone who knows anything about wrestling. They are made by people who like wrestling, which is great. But liking wrestling and doing wrestling are two very different things. And what people who like wrestling think is important about wrestling and what they want to tell is often of no interest to people that actually do wrestling. However, the two examples you gave, The Wrestler and Iron Claw, I thought both of those, I really enjoyed both of them. Um, I don't really like it when in a film like The Wrestler, it really focuses on the hardship and the poverty and the physical degradation. I think it's important to show that, to show the other side of it, but also sometimes it feels slightly insulting to the people who go through that to entertain other people and to make a career, to hyper focus on the sacrifice and the struggle rather than what they're trying to show you, which is their storytelling in the ring and what they're doing with their craft. It's not that often that you see a film about an actor or a dancer that focuses on the breaking down of their body and their mental well-being to do what they love. But for some reason, because wrestling is physical and because it involves obvious pain and suffering, people want to carry that storyline beyond the fourth wall and to the actual actor himself or herself. And I find that strange. It's a strange fetishization, I think, of the suffering of wrestlers, rather than focusing on what we actually aim to do. But at the same time, it really does show the physicality and the commitment. It's Iron Claw especially. It really shows you that a pro wrestler is every bit a professional athlete. That these aren't people who put on jazzy leggings and pretend to fight. If they're good at what they do, they are as dedicated to their craft as any professional sports person or athlete. So I loved that about it. I once fight directed a wrestling film based in British wrestling. It was a comedy. It was called Walk Like a Panther, and it was about a bunch of old wrestlers having to get together for one last showdown. So that was loads of fun to do. So as someone with a background in film, I do love it as a storytelling medium, but I sometimes wish that they'd focus more on what is great about wrestling rather than what is horrible.
What would you say are some of your favorite films, if you could have a top 3 or a top 4 that you could give us?
Yeah, my good lord.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, I know, right? What are the best films that have ever been made? Go. I'm not really a film person. I say that because I hang out with film people. So I know how much they know about film and how much they appreciate it on levels that I just simply don't understand. Um, I'm a performance artist. My love and my passion and my craft happens in front of audiences and in front of cameras. And a lot of the time, the processes that are then put in place to edit those performances or to direct them in the first place go over my head. I've had to learn a lot about that to direct Ragnarok itself, and that's been a fantastic learning curve. But I've never been someone who tends to study a thing like film and then go out to try and recreate it. So I'm not someone who can really give you a top movies or reasons, educated reasons why I like them. But what I can say is that the role that movies play in my life are for most people escapism and storytelling, right? So for me, given how intense my day-to-day life is, I like movies that um, are slower paced, story driven, and that don't jump around with 1,000 billion camera angles that my poor old brain can't keep up with.
I'm
I
with
like
you. I'm with
periods
you.
of, yeah, okay, good, good. Thanks, Jack. I was hoping that there'd be someone else out there. I like movies that have long takes. You know, I enjoy long, quiet takes where you really get wide shots where you really get to see an actor or an actress doing their thing, working their craft for minutes at a time. Because I find it calmer, I find it more representative of human experience, and I find I can appreciate what the people on the screen are doing. I've worked on enough movies to understand how you shoot for people that have no talent or ability. You know, you shoot short, you cut, you shoot tight, you cut a lot, and you edit a lot, right? Anyone can look like they can act or perform or do their thing if you shoot and edit enough. I've seen it. So when you see films where that isn't the case, where the camera's just rolling and the people are just doing their thing, that puts me in a really happy place. And I feel like I'm really appreciating artists.
It kind of exposes them, right? That you can't hide behind, we've got coverage, so we do a couple of different takes and we can work on different angles. If it's just you and the camera, there's nowhere to hide, is there? Which I guess is similar to your show, in that kind of that live experience is obviously there isn't a camera per se, but your eyes are the camera as the audience, and there's you can't really escape that, can you?
100%, man. And thank you for observing that. I think it's quite common for people to have that observation about TV and film, where they'll be like, wow, you know, it's just one long take where he's just acting the whole time. It's amazing. And for some reason, they don't do the mental leap to, oh, that's what stage actors do all the time for hours. And then the leap from there to, wait, that's what wrestlers do. We don't have, you can't cut around us missing. If we miss, we're screwed. You have to stick things in fight scenes. You have to make sure every beat lands. You don't have a second take. And in wrestling, and in Mythos as well, often the time, the audience is all around you. You can't hide. There's nowhere to hide. You have to go out and you have to do it, and it has to be real, or it's rubbish. And that's something I adore about what we do. The reason the show keeps coming back and keeps coming back is because it's really good. And it's only really good because we go out there and we do it 100% every time. If what we did was slightly fake or slightly hammy, people wouldn't come back and the show would have died. There's no one with deep pockets behind our show. It's just me. Every show I produce is paid for with money that came from people who bought tickets to the show beforehand. That's why it's growing slowly. So yeah, when I see people do that on screen, what we do on stage, I love that the most.
Just to round us off, what do you hope audiences feel when they leave the venue after watching your show?
Well, I remember the way that I felt as a kid watching wrestling. That sense of disbelief, of being amazed by the wrestlers, the characters that I just saw, but being equally amazed by the artists who were portraying those characters. The sense of disbelief, like a magic show, where you know that they weren't actually battering each other to death, but you can't necessarily work out how they got away with it. I want my audiences, adult audiences, to leave Mythos feeling the way that I felt when I witnessed professional wrestling as a kid. That's not to emphasize the pro wrestling of the show, but simply to say that when you go to see a theater show, you're aware that it isn't real. You're aware that this isn't a real story that the people are acting. And so you suspend your disbelief, and that suspension of disbelief carries over into the fight scenes in a way that doesn't necessarily happen with wrestling, where you go along expecting it to be fake and trying to spot how they're doing it. And as a result, I'd love it if people come out of our show realizing that they have been completely immersed in our world for 2 hours. They don't know how we've done it, but we have. And then for them to come out with a love for our craft that we have, and an understanding of what we do, that they'll then share with other people. Not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of my industry and our craft. If I could leave them with one impression, it's that what we do deserves to be on a stage alongside dance and theatre and circus, and in some cases more so. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a word, Jack, that summarizes that feeling.
Sometimes it speaks for itself, right? The way you feel, it's a feeling, and I think that's
Yeah,
sometimes enough, isn't it?
I
Yeah,
guess captivated. Um,
that's a good one.
And I've done this show over 250 times, and every time I've come out afterwards, I've spoken to either between 5 and 200 people afterwards, one by one. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes, sometimes it takes me an hour and a half, but I'll talk to anyone who wants to talk to me after the show. So when I talk about the reaction of the audience to our show, I'm speaking from a position of genuine experience because I have had those conversations for, at this point, hundreds of hours of my life. So I know how people feel when they come out, and I see them come back time and time again. So I know we're doing it right, Jack. So I'm just going to try and keep doing that while while clinging on for dear life.
Perfect. Ed, thank you so much. Can you plug your show quickly and tell the people all about your show at Alexandra Palace in March?
Hell yeah. My show is Mythos Ragnarok, Norse mythology performed through the medium of professional wrestling. A full-blown theatre show, but without any of the wafty stage combat that you probably are bored of seeing. This is full tilt, full extreme stage combat through the medium of the Norse gods. Our next show is at Alexandra Palace on the 20th, 21st, and 22nd of March. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that professional wrestling has ever been in Alexandra Palace Theatre, an iconic Victorian theatre. It might be the only time it ever happens. It's not a commercially produced theatre show. It is me on my own, standing up against the commodification of theatre. If you're there, you're not just supporting me and my industry, but you're supporting all of us as individual artists. So please come along. It's going to be a hell of a weekend. There's going to be live music, Nordic artwork. There's going to be a podcast, a live podcast recording right there and then. So come join in. We're much more than a theatre show. We're a whole experience.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that officially takes us up to the end of another episode. Hope you enjoyed. A massive thank you to Ed, of course. All of our links will be in the description, including our email. If you enjoyed this, please give us a 5-star on Apple and Spotify and follow us on all social media platforms if you so do desire. We'll be back next week with, I believe, in our scheduling, our big 2025 review. It will be a bumper episode. Last year was about 3 hours long. This year I've seen 100 2025 films, so it could be about 8 million hours long. But until next week, keep watching and keep consuming.